The talk on this time will deal with the subject of Nixon and the net. And I'd like to introduce Dr. Murray Rothbard.
Thank you. Yesterday I indulged in a bit of wistful and placid retrospection about a more idyllic time in America. And today, however, we turn to the present-day realities. And wistfulness will now give way to a certain amount of fury. To understand, I think, the phenomenon, and also my reaction to it, of the new economic policy which hit the country on August the 15th, we have to go back to a peculiar phenomenon which began to emerge in the late 50s. A peculiar syndrome. We have some libertarian psychologists, I think, here for this conference. Maybe they can examine this sometime. It's a syndrome which I finally dubbed Anarcho-Nixionism, it started in the late 50s when a young lad who was one of our small group, in those days the libertarian movement consisted of about something like 12 or 13 people. And one of the members of this young group, who was then getting interested in becoming a leader in young Republican circles, began to come to the conclusion, or pass the information back to us, that Governor Thomas E. Dewey, in those days the governor, was really an anarchist, in quotes. That was the beginning of Anarcho-Nixionism. I set it down at that time, wrongly of course. I set it down as a personal aberration on the part of this young lad. I thought that perhaps the strains of modern society had unhinged him and forgot about it. 2 or 3 years later, however, the phenomenon popped up again in much more virulent form. When 2 or 3 of my, those days, close friends were top aides to Mr. Nixon in the 1960 campaign. And they were going around the country and seeing him constantly and so forth. They reported to me that good old Dick is really an anarchist, or really libertarian, whichever phrase you want, because I speak to him, I see him every day. I see Dick every day in the boardroom or whatever, the blue room or whatever, and he says, yes, Jim or Ted or whatever the name was, I agree with you, I'm for freedom. And mesmerized by the lures and seductions of power, or at least close to the seduction seats of power, they came to the conclusion that Dick was really with us. And it's true that in public he has to say, can't reveal this because he has to get votes, but by God, when good old Dick gets into the White House, we'll see. So that was I was rather skeptical about the secret closet anarchism of Dick Nixon. And I'm still increasingly skeptical at this point. So happily, Dick Nixon didn't get in 1960, and Anarcho-Nixionism wasn't tested in the empirical cauldron at that point. But 8 years later, as we know, Dick Nixon rose to power. And various anarcho-Nixonites, of course, then in 1968 were telling me the same thing. Wait till Dick Nixon gets in office, and we'll see. This true inner libertarianism will then come to the fore. Also, several of these people have looked deep into Dick Nixon's eyes and concluded he was the most intelligent politician who'd ever come down the pike in this country. So, in addition to being the most libertarian. So, now we have the Nixon administration then comes into office, and after 3 years of approximately 3 years being in office, we find an interesting dichotomy here, because the rhetoric, we'll put it this way, we find that the Nixon administration in many circles is being tested or judged not on the basis of performance, but on the basis of rhetoric. So that, and people say, well, good old Dick Nixon says he's in favor of the free market. Good old Dick Nixon says he's against the draft. And the fact that the free market has been virtually abolished in the United States under Nixon's administration the fact that the draft continues on doesn't seem to weigh very heavily in the judgments of our current variants of anarcho-Nixonites. But I think, if you look at the moral, if you're making a moral judgment on politicians, you say, well, here's one guy who doesn't say he's in favor of the free market, who doesn't say he's against the draft, and then when he gets into office, of course, doesn't particularly add to the free market or eliminate the draft, and somebody else who says, yes, I'm in favor of the free market, I'm against the draft, I'm really a voluntarist, I'm not hard a libertarian, I'm with you, and so forth, and then comes into office and does precisely the opposite. Where do you weigh the moral? Where do you put him on the moral scale? It seems to me you put Mr. Nixon pretty close to the bottom. Well, as the Nixon regime continued in office, we in the Libertarian Forum, essentially myself in the Libertarian Forum, came to the conclusion somewhere around January 1970 that price and wage controls were coming up. In other words, that the Nixon administration was drifting slowly but surely in the direction of wage price controls. However, so it wasn't that I was so surprised, although of course the timing was sudden. I didn't expect the controls to be imposed at that moment. But the thing which really galvanized me into action and rocketed me into prominence as virtually the only opponent, well, put it this way, for several months the outstanding opponent of the wage price controls, only because I was the only opponent. So by default, I became the outstanding opponent. Not only the fact that so what surprised me, not only the fact that Mr. Nixon goes on television and announces that the entire economic system has changed, but also the fact that nobody attacked it. And this was kind of a shock. I mean, I guess I still remain sort of an idealist in this area. And before August the 15th, we had this kind of situation. We had, first of all, ever since I remember, which is something like 25 years, business groups, the Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, all had said they might have deviated from liberty on various other grounds. They might have come out in favor of Social Security or saving Lockheed or whatever, but at least we have the sort of solid stability of knowing they'd be against direct controls of the price system. At least you have the assurance of knowing they're against price and wage control. They've been fighting it. The Chamber of Commerce issued a very fine pamphlet about 20 years ago attacking it. The National Association of Manufacturers also. And so you had the solid opposition, supposedly the business community, and you had the conservative movement for all its defections, for all its warmongering, theocracy, et cetera, for all its deviations from principle, slide into the establishment. At least they're supposed to be against wage price controls. And then we have the nation's economists, almost all of whom, regardless of their political persuasion, were firmly opposed to wage price controls, to the extent Professor Eisner, a distinguished economist from Northwestern, reported in the Saturday Review a few weeks ago that he was assigned by President Galbraith, the American Economic Association, to find one distinguished economist outside of Galbraith who would defend wage price control. This was before August the 15th, and he couldn't find a single one. So we had the nation's economists solidly in our, in the free market camp, at least to that extent. So comes August the 15th, President Nixon gets on television, announces every button is being pushed, that as I am speaking, everything is frozen. And instead of hysteria mounting up, instead of the Daily News, saying impeach the SOB and so forth and so on, everybody says, great, terrific. In other words, the spectrum of opinion, spectrum of reaction, range from wild enthusiasm to silence, to slight criticism, saying, well, this is really an error. And so and particularly, of course, in the business community, the Washington Post, for example, reported the next day the mood in the business and banking community is almost euphoric, as they put it. This is pretty strong coming from the Washington Post. Every economist who was polled was quizzed in the papers, every business economist in particular. So this is terrific, great, magnificent. A distinguished leader of the free enterprise movement, which will remain nameless at this point, having fought for the free market for about 50 years or something, and attacked statism, asked his reaction to the controls, said, terrific, now we can break those damn unions. And this seemed to be the sort of general picture. The Chamber of Commerce was highly enthusiastic. National Association of Manufacturers was highly enthusiastic. And so this whole reaction to the thing was of course stunned me, galvanized me much more to action than the thing itself. The thing itself was bad enough. The fact that the President of the United States can go on television, suddenly wipe out the free market, suddenly impose permanent peacetime controls, which for the first time in American history since the NRA, which is still unconstitutional. I mean, the constitutional decision is still there. The Schechter case, still on the books until Mr. Nixon's kept judges will presumably declare that the present system is constitutional. But as of this moment, the phase 1, phase 2 is really unconstitutional. So, and yet, you know, as I say, the reaction was fantastic. The reaction of Hosanna. Now at last we have a strong president. He's taken control. This is terrific. We're going to curb those unions. We're going to stop inflation. You know, among the very same people that are supposed to be in favor of the free enterprise system. So, then I started racing around, writing and speaking everywhere I could to oppose it. The high point of this came with a very interesting session, a debate we had in Washington before the Everett McKinley-Dirksen Republican Forum. A debate that I had with Herbert Stein, a distinguished Chicago school economist and architect of Phase 2 that we're just about to live under, principal architect, and Mr. Madden, who was the chief economist of the Chamber of Commerce. And we had several hundred people there. Fortunately, we had a strong ginger group of about 25 libertarians in the Washington area who turned out en masse. And it stunned Stein. I was very gratified because at the end of the whole thing, Stein turned to me and said, "Did you bring all these people down from Brooklyn?" And I assured him that no, this is a nationwide movement. I was quite nasty to Dr. Madden. He was a very nice fellow, I must say, in the Chamber of Commerce, because I spent my most good part of my speech saying that when I was in graduate school and college, I used to clasp to my bosom the material from the Chamber of Commerce and the NAM, attacking wage price controls, defending the free market. And my cynical left-wing fellow students would say, these guys don't really favor the free market. It's all a shuck, and they really favor special privileges and monopolies, and this is just a cover-up. And I would defend, the Chamber of Commerce and the NAM strongly, and I say this is a left-wing smear. And I said, now I find out it wasn't a left-wing smear. it was quite accurate. So the reaction of both Stein and Madden was very interesting on this because, Madden, Dr. Madden's defense of the thing, well, first of all, of course, the fact we have to stop the unions, which apparently will justify almost any kind of totalitarianism. And second of all, that it was very odd because we were talking at that point about the 10% import surcharge, which I was attacking with great bitterness. And he said, he started talking about Kent State. It was very, very peculiar. So I said we have Kent State, and then we have this problem of divided America, and we had to do something to bring America together. And I was really, you get to the point, even after many years of speaking and arguing, etc., you get to the point, sometimes you really get dumbfounded. And you have to bring America together, and we have to, and everybody gets behind the president, and that sort of thing. Dr. Stein was even more interesting. Don't forget, now remember, he's a member of the Council of Economic Advisors, the principal architect of this whole program. And he says he's the one who brings up the Edict of Diocletian. Those of you who are not familiar with this, the attack on wage price controls, you always begin with the Edict of Diocletian. He was a late Roman emperor who, after causing inflation, he and his predecessors had causing inflation by debasing the coinage, started getting very irritated by the fact that prices and wages were going up. So now, the Emperor Diocletian did not play around with any kind of voluntary rhetoric. He was what would now be called hard-nosed. And he didn't bother with, voluntary compliance and all that nonsense. He cut right to the root. He decreed the death penalty for any violation. And if you go back and read the rhetoric of the Emperor Diocletian, it sounds very much like President Nixon in the Phase 2 program. We can't, we must put the general interest above the special interest, and so on and so on. And he decrees the death penalty. Even that doesn't work. I mean, even with the death penalty, even the execution of every violation, it doesn't work. And the thing, after a few years, they have to repeal the controls after a lot of headaches and executions. And that was the end of it. So Stein himself brings up the Edict of Diocletian. He says, yes, of course, Rothbard is correct. It's not going to work. We all know that. Our mentors have told us that and so forth. And remember the Edict of Diocletian. So then he says, therefore, since it won't work, what are you worried about? I swear, that was my second dumbfounding moment. And so, so we'll have this thing for a few years. We bring America together. We elect the president. That was sort of the implicit, we re-elect the president, obviously the implicit assumption there. And then, the thing phases out in a few years. And we drop it. So, therefore, we should all get behind it. That was, I got a similar reaction a couple of days ago, that very dumbfounding moment of this whole struggle. I spoke before the Ripon Society in New York, and somebody, one of the questioners said, well, why are you complaining about this? After all, President Nixon wants to get reelected, and therefore he's doing what he has to do, even if he knows it won't work. And at least I was able to come back with saying that, I'm looking at it from the viewpoint not of President Nixon, but from the viewpoint of American citizens who suffer under this stuff. But then during the question period, one of the heroic libertarian members of the Washington Libertarian Movement started asking Dr. Stein about Nixon's Phase 2. I recommend everybody go and read Nixon's Phase 2 speech in October or whatever. First of all, it's filled with rhetoric. It's very reminiscent of the Nazi party philosophy. The famous phrase, "Gemeinnütz geht vor Eigennutz." The common good comes before the individual good. There's a constant reiteration that we have to sacrifice individual interests for the larger good. There's a constant talk about sacrifice and the common good over the individual interests, and so forth. Which I would append or interpose here. Whenever any politician, any political leader starts talking to you about sacrifice, run for the hills, because it's not him that's going to do the sacrifice. So at the end of this, in the question period, one of the Washington Libertarian people started quizzing Dr. Stein about. President Nixon says that the phase 1 and Phase 2 program is going to be voluntary. It's going to rest on voluntary compliance by the business and labor. And yet in the next sentence he says that anybody who, to the effect, and anybody who violates the regulations will be zapped by the government. How do you resolve this contradiction? How can it be voluntary when you're going to, move hard against anybody who violates them? So first he didn't understand the question. And they waltzed around with that for a little while, and she repeated the question. And finally it came through to him. And here I swear he was being very serious in his answer, because he has a reputation for being great wit in Washington circles. Anyway, so he was being very serious in his answer. And he said, well, it's voluntary. It's just as voluntary as taxation. And the whole hall erupted in a magnificent burst of libertarian sardonic laughter. Exactly. And I, of course, took the opportunity to say this is the first statement Dr. Stein had said all night that I wholeheartedly agreed with. It's just as voluntary as taxation. And the people, will get together, he says, and they agree to pay taxes. So it's the same thing here. So, so this is the sort of attitude we have. Plus the fact that various friends of mine who are not exactly anarcho-Nixonites, but happen to see the president, like 2 days after the August 15th imposition, or a couple of days before, or whatever, keep assuring me that, don't worry, it's okay, Dick knows it won't work. And this is supposed to somehow alleviate the situation, sort of allay my opposition. A good old Dick down deep there in the closet knows that it won't work. Now, once again, look at the moral situation here. If a guy sincerely believes that the controls are going to work and puts it in, weighs the moral judgment here about somebody that sort of person, and the sort of person who supposedly knows it doesn't work and puts it in anyway. What kind of a leader is that we have in this country? Another aspect of this thing, which I find rather scary, is I'm beginning to get the impression, first of the Nixon style of this is very similar to the style of the Cambodian invasion and the one other, I think the Laos bombing or something. Well, President Nixon gets on television on usually it's a Sunday night. Everybody's sort of lulled to sleep by the Sunday dinner. And without any visible crisis going on, he pushes every button in sight. As of this moment, whatever, everything is frozen. As of this moment, we have marched into Cambodia 8 hours ago or something. And the general reaction is, we got great, we got a strong president. And the Gallup poll then polls people, and 80% of the people think it's the greatest thing that's ever happened since the invention of fire. And I'm beginning to get the impression that we've got to the point in this country where President Nixon could literally go on television and announce anything, announce any conceivable thing. We have to safeguard the security of this country. We've just declared war against Portugal or something. And 80% of the people say, "Great, terrific. We finally have a strong president at the helm." So that in itself is a very scary aspect of this whole business. The executive presidential despotism, the Führer principle, which is increasingly taken hold in this country. Well, the nation's lawyers, as far as I know, only Professor Arthur Miller of George Washington Law School plaintively pointed out this is really unconstitutional. This is a delegation of power which is excessive. It's similar to the NRA, which is declared unconstitutional. I think there are 4 professors at Catholic University Law School who are suing the government. But I don't place much hope that this will be successful. So I began to plunge into the fray as best I could. We're getting to the point now where a little bit of rumbling is taking place. Where business is beginning to realize that maybe everything's not so great in this phase 2 program. I think the profit freeze has just been announced. The profit margin freeze should be a nice blow to the gut to the ardent business supporters of the Nixon policy. For one thing, the decree is you can raise your prices to cover costs a certain amount, but if productivity increases in your plant, you can't raise prices by that much. You have to deduct the increase in productivity from the price increase that will be allowed. Now you can imagine how much ardor will be placed into increasing productivity at this point. Every time you increase productivity, you get docked for it. This is not going to exactly improve the productivity record of the American economy, which has been pretty miserable for the last couple of years anyway. The 3% productivity increase is only a long-run average. For the last couple of years, it's been much closer to 0, a 3% increase. So, but what we've got is for the first time since the NRA, a permanent peacetime control setup. Now, I've been criticized bitterly in many circles for using the word fascism to apply to the system. But I submit this as the only accurate term which any historical scholar can apply to the current setup. The economy of fascism, by fascism, of course, I'm talking about the political economy of fascism, the corporate state, which is the essence of the beast. The economy of fascism was designed provide a third way, a middle way, or third way, whatever you want to call it, between the two extremes which were rejected in the 1920s, increasingly rejected, the extreme of laissez-faire capitalism and the extreme of proletarian Marxism. The third way was the way of a corporate state, and in this third way we had the tripartite system coming to the fore for the first time. We had the representatives of big labor, representatives of big business, and big government as the arbiter, the umpire between them. And heading up the whole thing was Il Duce, the president, the minister, the leader, imposing, making the final say about the various decisions, the tripartite decision. And this was supposed to have the effect, you eliminate the bad old laissez-faire, and you substitute not the class struggle of Marxists, where everybody's fighting each other and it's kind of nasty and unaesthetic. You substitute a tripartite system which brings all classes into harmony under the aegis of big government, under the nation state. And if you look back at history of the 1920s, a lot of American liberals explicitly were very fond of fascism. The New Republic had about 3-4 years there when they were really hooping it up for Mussolini as the way out. And the NRA, which I mentioned before, Roosevelt's New Deal, was explicitly designed to imitate the fascist corporate state. And this is what essentially we've gotten back to now. We've gotten back to a system where and of course there's all sorts of jockeying for power. Should the pay board be autonomous from the cost of living board and that sort of thing. It's not the sort of issue which really sends me to paroxysms of delight. I don't really care whether the pay board has 5 members or 6, or whether the public member is really doing whatever. The point is we've now gotten to the point where the jockeying for power takes place in the federal government arena, where the government makes all the decisions for the economic system, and various large groups are jockeying. Should labor get 2 more guys on the board, and should they have 3% instead of 4, and that sort of stuff. The result of which the individual taxpayer, the individual consumer, and the individual businessman is the one who gets pushed out of the cold. And so it's a system which everybody's adopting and fairly, at least so far, and with great enthusiasm. It's a system, I submit, which even though it won't work in the sense that it won't check inflation, it will create shortages, increasingly create shortages, will create all sorts of havoc in the economic system. There'll be things like this. There'll be, we've already, for example, a person close to my heart, which will remain nameless, is a great fan of caramel almond crunch ice cream, 2 or 3 brands, and she reports, and I can endorse this, having also being a fan of caramel almond crunch ice cream, that since August the 15th, the almonds have mysteriously disappeared from the caramel almond crunch. There ain't no more almonds; they're out. And this will increasingly be the case as these controls continue on. We'll find the quality of the products declining. We'll find that the nails will start buckling a little bit more easily than they have before. We'll find that the baby, you can't find the baby Ruth hardly anymore anyway underneath the air. There'll be much more air on the candy bar. And it's impossible, of course, for the government to enforce this. I mean, how do you find out? How do you make sure that the candy bar has the same amount of chocolate it had, not 2% less, or that the almonds are still there? You need a 10 million man Gestapo, armed with a teeth, expert in this whole area, to figure this out. I'm also going to report. So even though the controls won't work in the sense that they won't check inflation, they will cause a great deal of havoc as the thing goes on. So as far as I'm concerned, the fact that there's no opposition, no political opposition to the controls, in the sense the Democrats are all for it, since they've been favoring it for many years. The Republicans are locked into the thing because their beloved president, the leader of this thing, has put it in. We now have a situation where there's no political opposition for the first time, because in World War II, when we had the controls and they didn't work, in the Korean War when we had the controls and they didn't work, at least the Republicans then were against them. The Republicans provided a political opposition where the public could turn to. Now, however, we have no political opposition. We libertarians are virtually the only opposition there is. Now, this provides us with an opportunity I'm not in favor of the opportunity being there, but since it's there, it provides us with an opportunity to fill the leadership vacuum in the whole country against the controls. Because we are literally, virtually the only people who are opposed to it, especially opposed to it on principle. We're not opposed to it because the unions aren't getting the 4 instead of 3% or something. We're opposed to it on moral, political, and economic principle. And provides us an opportunity to get our message, a general message, across to the public as a whole, especially as the thing will begin to crack up, as it obviously will and must. We can also speed the cracking up of the controls. Seems to me an important point. In other words, we should agitate for civil disobedience on a mass scale against the controls. Now, the point is we have on our side in this thing, we have our good old, those of us who read Miss Rand's novels and so forth, we have on our side the good old motive, good old rational motive of greed. Greed was working for us. I'm all in favor of greed. So greed is on our side. The thing which is working against us, the so-called voluntary compliance. Obviously, it's not voluntary. It's just that there's only 3,000 IRS members who are enforcing this damn thing. So that it rests on the voluntary compliance of the majority of the country. And the thing we have working against us, of course, is the so-called moral imperatives on the side of Mr. Nixon, the general interest, the common good, and so forth, which is supposedly in favor of the controls. So we have a perfect textbook case here of individual interest versus the so-called common interest. We can explain to the public that the so-called common interest is really the interest of the state apparatus and Mr. Nixon. It's Mr. Nixon cloaking himself in the so-called general good. I should also point out, by the way, that cunningly, 2 years ago, before of course, the wage price controls were imposed, Mr. Nixon and the Congress granted themselves a 40% wage increase, thus, making themselves nice and comfortable before the general freeze came in. And this, of course, is characteristic. The sacrifice is never on the part of the ruling politicians. The sacrifice is always on the part of the average person. So we have then we have individual interests of greed working on our behalf, and we have to do is to push it and place the moral imprimatur upon the natural workings of the individual person in this situation. For example, I'm happy to report that already the heroic repairmen of New York have broken the freeze. Not acting, of course, on libertarian principle, but acting again on their own individual interest. What happens is something like this. The painter, the landlord calls in the painter to paint an apartment. And he finds out that it's 20% higher than it was on August the 15th. So how come? There's a wage price freeze. The guy says, well, this is a different wall. There's more cracks in it. The plaster is coming in over the framus. It's a tougher wall. The same thing with the heroic TV repairmen. They say, wow, this is a different set. The condenser is now wrapped around the horizontal element, and the differential have to charge more. Imagine how much it would take to really enforce, to make sure that every TV set is exactly the same, and the wall is really tougher. You need, of course, a 10 million man Gestapo to spy on every wall and every TV set, and to be able to compare them. You need a 2 million man Gestapo to check up on them that they aren't being paid off by the repairman. So in a sense, it rests on voluntary compliance. In a sense, it rests on the majority compliance to support this darn thing. And our role then is to agitate in public as much as possible, to show the public there is another alternative, to show the public there is a free market solution, and to advocate the busting up of the controlled system, which will hopefully remove the so-called moral inhibitions on the natural greed of the individual citizen. Thereby, I hope, busting the controls as quickly as possible. And one other thing I'd like to mention in this thing, I never have a chance, since I spend my time attacking the controls so much, I almost never have a chance to talk about the foreign part of the package. I must say, incidentally, talking about leads or tie-ins with power, the hypnotism of power exerts, The Daily News had an interview with our #1 Randian economist, Mr. Alan Greenspan, the day after the controls. Now, it's possible he was wrongly quoted or wasn't quoted enough. But just going on the quote in the news, Mr. Greenspan's reaction to the whole package was almost, quote, it's great that we have an investment tax credit once again, and it's great that the deficit is going to be cut by a couple of $1 billion, period. There was no mention of the wage price freeze, no mention of the protectionist aspect of the foreign part of the package, nothing, you know. And thereby he preserved his libertarian credentials without saying anything, without attacking, of course, the essence of the whole regime. And so this is one example of the fascination of power hold, to keep your lines open to Mr. Nixon just in case his closet libertarianism pops up. He will call on you then to show how, to really bring about the free market once again. But the foreign aspect is not just as bad as the domestic aspect of the Nixon new economic policy. The foreign aspect is an almost savage return, unilateral and savage return to the international economy of the 1930s. It's protectionism on a grand scale. It's a 10% surcharge plus the import quotas, which have been coming in more and more. Plus the going off gold, which is also in essence a protectionist measure. And the whole thing was done in a savage, bitter manner, where you lay down, Secretary Connolly lays down the law to everybody, you're not going to get away with this anymore, etc., etc., kicking our allies, in quotes, in the gut, after they'd been piling up dollars at our behest since 1944, piling up $40–50 billion worth of dollars. And we keep pleading with them, don't cash them in for gold because it'll embarrass everybody and so forth. All of a sudden we go off gold and we start attacking them literally, and we raise tariffs and so forth. This kind of action plunged us already back in the 1930s kind of situation. Economic warfare of currency blocks, of competing protectionism, competing devaluations. This is just beginning. I must admit, I thought when this was done on August the 15th, I thought that in a couple of weeks some deal had been worked out already. In a couple of weeks we go back to another kind of Bretton Woods setup, a little bit more fluctuating exchange rate or something like that. But it turns out there was no agreement. It was just a unilateral unilateral turning on all of Western Europe and Japan, and plunging back into a savage economic warfare, which could easily result in another war, because the Secretary of State Cordell Hull, if you might remember, who after all should know something, because he was Secretary of State all during the 30s, kept saying that one of the big reasons for World War II was the fact of the currency blocks and tariffs and competing protectionism. The attitude of the administration toward Japan is kind of scary too, because we're now getting this kind of an attitude throughout Washington, which I really felt when I was down there too, that Japan has become evil once more after 25 years. What was it, 1945? After 25 years or so of being a heroic champion of the free world, progressive, thrifty, and productive, all of a sudden Japan has become imperialistic, aggressive, and evil again. And we're beginning to get the feeling, especially now that China has all of a sudden become good once more, at about the same time that Japan has suddenly become evil, beginning to get this feeling of deja vu. We're going back to 1938, which I'm still, really old, unfortunately old enough to remember. In 1938, we're back in the old days when Japan was going to conquer everybody, and we have to do something to stop them. Heroic China was being aggressed against by Japan. Beginning to get the same sort of attitude back in the administration. The aggression of Japan, of course, consists of them, selling us stuff. Every time they sell us a camera, the administration is at a froth of the mouth, because they're daring to sell us another camera, another the art of textiles. They're selling it cheaply, and goddamn it, they're more efficient and so forth. We got to do something about that. We got to zap them. And this whole attitude to Japan is unbelievable. It's and naked and open. As a matter of fact, one prominent conservative was telling me when I was down in Washington, prominent Washington conservative, yes, we have to do something to stop Japan, she said, because you see, when for example, the automobile industry, she was telling me that when other countries compete in the automobile market, when they want to set up agencies here and so forth, they check first with General Motors and Ford. You know, they tell them in advance what they're going to do. They say we're going to open up the Datsun or whatever here. We're going to charge such and such a price. We're going to have such and such a model. It's all part of the sort of a chummy club. When the Japanese come in, they don't tell anybody. They just open up and they start competing. It's this terrible thing. Shows, of course, might reveal a dedication to free competition among the America's conservatives also. So we're beginning to build up this whole attitude toward Japan, and also I think toward West Germany and Italy and Belgium and so forth and so on. And in this very well, I'm not usually the type. I'm usually very cautious about any predictions at all. But I think I see looming on the horizon a strong possibility of a severe depression in the United States, brought about by a looming depression in Western Europe and Japan, brought about in turn by our protectionist policies of August the 15th. Western Europe and Japan are heavily dependent, of course, on exports. As we cut down, as we mount our protectionist campaign, we're pushing them relentlessly into what could be a very deep depression, which would redound back in the United States, not only because our exports would be hurt, but also because the bonds and the stocks which foreign countries have, American bonds and stocks which foreign countries have in their possession, they could start dumping. And when they start dumping it, everything will then hit the fan, because the interest rates will, stock market will collapse, interest rates will bound upward, there'll be a severe depression in the United States. And if this occurs, which I don't think is beyond the realm of possibility at all, if this occurs next year, we might, Mr. Nixon, this would be a beautiful, I think, judgment. Daniel will come to judgment of Mr. Nixon, because Mr. Nixon, after sacrificing his so-called convictions, if these convictions really exist, which I won't concede for a minute, sacrificing his so-called convictions for the free market on the altar of his re-election, after plunging us into economic fascism and international economic warfare, in order to be re-elected, we might very well segue into the November elections with the following scenario. Severe unemployment, severe depression, continuing accelerating inflation, the controls breaking down, still there, but obviously breaking down by that point, international economic warfare. At that point, Mr. Nixon's re-election possibility should be pretty close to zero. And it's one satisfaction, be like almost like a novel, where the bad guy finally comes to his doom by his own, by cutting his own throat. And I hope sincerely that this will happen then. In other words, that if this happens, Mr. Nixon will then be dispatched quickly to a hopefully unhappy retirement of the private life. Thank you.